Jeering thousands charge big suffragette parade and riot ensues. Leaders in the cause roast police for not protecting parade. Crowding thousands hostile to women. Cavalry is called out to clear Pennsylvania Avenue of those who stop parade. 5,000 women marching in the woman suffrage pageant today practically fought their way foot by foot up Pennsylvania Avenue through a surging mob that completely defied the Washington police, swamped the marchers, and broke the procession into little companies. The women, trudging stoutly under great difficulties, were able to complete their march only when troops of cavalry from Fort Myer were rushed into Washington to take charge of Pennsylvania Avenue. The scenes resembled those of Thursday when General Rosalie Jones and her bedraggled hikers marched up Pennsylvania Avenue, hindered by mobs but on a much larger scale. The parade had to fight every step of the way and took an hour to march the first 10 blocks. The women were in tears at the jeers and insults that greeted them along the line of march. Although stout wire ropes had been stretched up and down Pennsylvania Avenue from the Peace Monument to the other end of the avenue, the crowds which arrived early to gain points of vantage overstepped them or crawled beneath. Apparently no effort was made to drive back the trespassers in the early hours, with the result that, when the parade started, it faced at almost every 100 yards a solid wall of humanity. On the whole, it was a hostile crowd through which the women marched. Miss Inez Mulholland, herald of the procession, distinguished herself by aiding in the riding down a mob that blocked the way and threatened to disrupt the parade. Another woman of the Petticoat Cavalry struck a hoodlum with a stinging blow across the face with her riding crop in reply to a scurrilous remark as she was passing. The mounted police seemed powerless to stem the tide of humanity. Mrs. Taft and daughter were annoyed. A group of hoodlums gathered in front of the reviewing stand in which sat Mrs. Taft and Miss Helen Taft and a half-dozen invited guests from the White House. They kept up a running fire of caustic comments. Apparently no effort was made to remove them, and evidently disgusted, the White House party left before the procession had passed in its halting and interrupted journey to the hall. The tableau on the steps of the Treasury building, framed in the great columns and broad stairway of the government treasure house, were begun when the parade started from its rendezvous at the base of the Capitol. Beautiful in coloring and grouping, the dramatic symbolization of women's aspirations for political freedom was completed long before the head of the parade was in sight. In their thin dresses and bare arms, the players stood shivering for more than an hour, and finally they were forced to seek refuge within the building. Around the Treasury Department, the crowds were massed so tightly that repeated charges by the police were seemingly ineffective. It was as though the blue coach charged a stone wall. Occasionally, the mob gave way in one place, only to break over and under the wire hedge at some other. Cavalry restores order. When the cavalry suddenly appeared, there was a wild outburst of applause in the reviewing stand. The men in brown virtually brushed aside the mounted and foot police and took charge. In 2 lines, the troop charged the crowds. Evidently realizing they would be ridden down, the mobs fought their way back. When they hesitated, the cavalrymen, under the orders of their officers, did not hesitate. Their horses were driven into the throngs and whirled and wheeled until hooting men and women were forced to retreat. A space was quickly cleared. It's Tuesday, March 4th, 1913.